We're now live. There's nobody here yet.
Same on Facebook.
Hello. Hey guys, it's Hillary, owner of the Cookie Countess. How are you today? Thank you for joining me. Is this thing on? No, not yet. You know what? This is on though. We did get a mic. We heard you and you said you couldn't always hear us, so we are mic'd up and ready to rock. So thanks for joining us today. Before I get down to the business of the day, I did want to drop a reminder that we're having a sale right now. It's going till at least the end of the week, maybe through the weekend. We haven't quite decided yet. But there's a lot of good stuff to stock up on for the upcoming holidays, Mother's Day, graduation. We also have all of our PYO supplies on sale, including palettes and the black stencil icing. So if you watched the live, that was like 3 weeks ago with Will, when she did how to do the PYOs, all that stuff is on sale right now. And we put all our Easter stuff on sale too, so if you want to stock up on that. All right, so that's out of the way. So I'm going to talk about airbrushing. We're going to go through all the basics. You guys can ask questions anytime you want. And Sarah and Emily will relay the questions. They are manning the cameras today. I'm going to put this down now. And did you see Sarah stole my mini mic though? My tiny mic, by the way, for her video. You know, she did not ask permission. I think she needs her own tiny mic. Anyway, so I've done this before in the past, but we haven't done it in a while. And I just wanted to go over like the real basics of the airbrush machine, how it works, the different parts of it, how to get started, how to help yourself get comfortable with it. I know airbrushing can be really intimidating if you've never done it before. And then I promise you, when you take it out of your box and you start using it, and the minute it clicks, you're gonna say, oh, that was so scary. Why did I put that off for so long? I've heard this time and time again. I had the same feeling like 10 years ago when I first started airbrushing. So seems intimidating, but it's really not, and I can help you get there through some tips I'm gonna show you today.
Aw, cute. Bakery wants to shout out the black stencil icing that's on sale. She said it changed her life.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about, now the one I'm showing you today is our Royal Max airbrush system. I have the box over here. Here's this to show you. So this is our new system that we came out with. We designed this from the ground up. John designed this whole thing, how the mechanics would work of it. What we wanted to do was build a better airbrush machine that was still compact, still quiet, but had a bigger punch when it came to the PSI. PSI stands for pounds per square inch, and that's a pressure of the air coming out. So, and we wanted to give you some other features, like this one has some integrated gun holders, which is nice. They're easy to clean because they're on the outside. So this is something that we came out with. It's been about a year, I think, that this has been out, right? And we also right now have it bundled with a magic screen, which I'll show you how to use this later. And we have it bundled with 12 of our airbrush colors in the mini bottle size. So that's what I'm going to talk about specifically today, but most of the stuff also applies to our original machine. And if you have a different machine at home, you can still apply most of this information to that.
Perfect. And Debbie, yes, this will be available immediately after for rewatch.
Yes.
If anybody else is wondering.
Yes. And we'll post it to YouTube too if you can't find it on Instagram or Facebook afterwards. All right, so let's talk about the machine. So your machine comes with a few basic parts. You've got your power cord, you have your air hose, you have your power switch, and this is the same on all the machines. And you have your air pressure right here. Let's turn this off. So plus, least, so you can adjust that right there. So this is a single action gun. There are two different types of airbrush guns. There's dual action and there's single action. Single action means that you only have to pull back this trigger. Dual action, you would have to push down and then pull back. So on a dual action machine, the compressor also spools up, so you'll hear it turn on, and then it might turn off because it builds up a certain amount of pressure, and then it'll go on and off, so it operates a little different. Single action machines, all of ours are single action. Most of your small compressor styles are single action. The compressor is always running,
It's important to know that air is always coming out. This does not mean that it's broken. So just know that air is always going to be coming out of your machine. You can adjust the air with your knob here, going up or down, and you can kind of hear maybe the difference. If you get your machine out, just put your hand in front of it, or put your finger in front of it, and you'll feel the difference in air pressure as you play with that nozzle, or the knob. With your, I'll just turn it off so I'm not talking over it. So with your gun, you have your color well is here, and you've got your trigger here. And what this is doing is there is a needle inside this, and I'm going to take off this nozzle just to show you. So here, how about I put it right here? Can you see that? Yes. So if you see this needle right here, when I pull back the trigger, the needle comes back and out of the way. So that action there is what's going to let the color, this is a gravity fed machine, so it's just the gravity is pulling, letting the color flow. The color is going to come through here, and then when you move that needle out of the way, color will come out. Color should not be coming out until you move that needle. If for some reason you have an airbrush machine that it's doing that, that's a quick fix, and Sarah showed us how to do that last week in our video last week. But I just want to show you that's basically the mechanism, the most important mechanism. So all these other parts are here to protect the needle, to protect the housing of how this works and moves out of the way. So there's nothing electronic in this part of the gun. On the Royal Max machine, I also want to point out that this has a quick connect. So as opposed to this being directly attached to a hose where like there's a lot of air pressure and suction, you have to yank it out. This quick connect makes it easy to change out guns. So if you have multiple guns, you can quickly switch this out. So that's a great feature of the quick connect.
We do have a few questions on here, but I think that they are things that you are going to go over. Okay. So if I don't answer your question right away or call on your question, let's give Hillary a chance to answer it.
Okay, and then ask again if I didn't get to it. All right, so this machine, so again, on, and then pulling back on this. Now one thing I do want, and I'll show you when I put color in here, but one thing to remember is this is not, don't think of this as an on-off switch. This does not have to be open or closed. You want to play with how much you open this. That's gonna make a huge difference in how much color comes out. So I'm gonna show you how to do that with the color, but I just want to point that out while this is kind of sitting up here. Okay.
Sounds like people are having trouble with our video on this side, so we will make sure we repost this in better quality, maybe from the other one.
Is the Wi-Fi toggled off? I turned the Wi-Fi off. Okay. All right. Okay.
But we'll repost it after.
Okay, we'll repost it. All right. So let me show you and tell you a couple things about airbrush color. So you do need specific color for your airbrush gun. You don't want to just put gel color in here. Gel color is very thick. Airbrush color is a concentrated color that's a water base, so it's watered down. It's not the same formula as a gel color, so it's not just gel color with water added. So don't try to thin out your gel colors and then use them in the airbrush machine. So you're going to end up probably clogging your machine. It's going to end up tacky. You're not going to get a good finish. So make sure you use an actual airbrush color. So to put color in your machine, so I've got our mini bottles that have this nice little opening. So all you have to do is drop it right in. You can fill this up as much or as little as you want. So depending on how many cookies you're going to make with this color. Now I do get asked a lot, you know, how many cookies can you cover with one, say, well worth of, which is about, not quite a tablespoon, probably a little more than, probably a teaspoon and a half. How much color, how many cookies would that cover? So this is a really hard question to answer. I wish I could be like 6 cookies, but I really can't because it greatly depends on, are you covering, you know, the entire cookie with a color? Are you using a stencil that has a lot of opening? Or using a stencil that just has a little bit of an opening? So this all really makes a difference on how much color you use. So once you get going, you'll get a feel for like how fast are you gonna go through the color, knowing your project. And do I just put a couple drops in because I only need it for this one cookie, or do I just fill it up because I'm gonna keep going and do like 2 dozen cookies with this one color? Emily, you had a question?
Are you gonna go over metallic stuff using metallics
So
today?
I'm not gonna show any metallics today, I don't have that, but the process is all the same. We do have a separate gun that has a wider nozzle that Sarah talked about last week.
Somebody had asked specifically how far does that the trigger have to be pulled back for metallic colors? I wasn't sure if
So you might find that you want to pull it back a little bit more because the metallics are thicker. So that's just something you'll want to play with.
Okay. Thank you.
So again, I've got my color in here. My machine's on. There's no color coming out. There's still air coming out, but no color yet. Just move this out of the way. So I encourage you, when you get your machine, put some color in and just start playing around on a paper towel. Don't go right to the cookie that you just baked and flooded so perfectly. Like, definitely practice for a while first. So I'm pulling back here and color's gonna start coming out, right? Now I do want to point out, I use my thumb. Apparently this is not that normal. Or it's more unusual. Sarah, what do you use?
I use my pointer finger.
Use your pointer finger. Okay, so a lot of people use their pointer finger. I use my thumb. So maybe experiment and see which one you like best. I think the reason I feel comfortable with my thumb is because if I'm aiming down when I'm stenciling, I don't have to, it's not as awkward for my hand motion. It's more just like a simple twist and my hand doesn't have to say any different, if that makes sense. So you might, if this feels awkward to you, but that's how you started because you saw somebody else do it that way, maybe try using your thumb and see if that's more comfortable.
Got some thumb users here.
You've got yeah, you know what? Thumbs up to the thumbs.
Thumb support.
All right, so give it a try. All right, now when you start playing around with your airbrush, I want you to practice. Okay, if I pull back on this trigger just a little bit, what happens? If I pull back a lot, what happens? If I am really close, what happens? If I'm far away, what happens? Also, I want to note, I have my machine on high. I tend to leave my machine on high all the time, and I control my color with this. So if you have the advantage of having your machine on high is that it is pushing the color out with as fine of a mist as possible. So the coverage is going to be really fine and not like splattery. If I put this to low, and you can hear there's a difference. Do you see how it gets just a little bit? It still looks pretty good because this machine is an excellent machine, but do you see the difference in that we have this little bit of speckling, whereas if I turn it on high, I don't get that, and I have more of like a concentrated area to work on. So I encourage you to leave it on high, maybe just leave it there, maybe in the middle somewhere is a good place for you, but this is why it's good to practice and just, you know, see what works for you. But again, I like my machine on high, and then I play around with my distance from the surface of the cookie and how much I'm pulling back on this. So think about, one thing I'll say is, think about when you first started making cookies and you first learned how to use a piping bag. And when you were trying to just pipe lines, you had to get a feel for how much pressure you're putting on the bag and how fast are you moving with your piping bag. So if you don't put enough pressure and you move too quickly, the line will break. If you put too much pressure and don't move too quickly, the line will squiggle. So kind of just think in those, not that those exact terms translate to the gun, but it does make a difference how much you are pulling back on the trigger and how close or far away you are from your surface and how quickly you're moving across that surface. So the same way that you got used to your piping and how to get just that perfect line, that's the same, you're gonna get the same kind of understanding and like muscle memory when it comes to the airbrushing. Does that make sense?
I have two of the same question in a row.
Okay.
How long do you wait until airbrushing after you flooded your cookies?
So you definitely want them to be fully crusted over. It doesn't necessarily have to be like an overnight, but they definitely do have to be like fully crusted, especially if you're stenciling, because you're gonna have the weight of, not the stencil weighs a lot, but if you're putting pressure on that surface with by the Stencil Genie or Magic Screen and whatnot. So you do want to have them be like fully crusted. So that time frame might be different depending on your royal icing recipe, depending on the conditions, the humidity levels, all of that. My workflow used to be that I would like flood one day and then do everything else the next day, just because that was easy for me. But again, that's a personal kind of workflow decision.
I have a couple of people who are concerned about the fact that there's no lid on the color well, and they're afraid all the liquid is going to fall out.
So I'm perfectly vertical. I've got my well is about, what, 60% full, maybe half full. So I think if you see where it has this little like bend in it, I think if you fill it to that bend, and then you're gonna be fine. I wouldn't fill it all the way to the top and then do this, but.
And is that the recommended angle for holding your gun, would you say?
So it would depend on what you're doing. So if you're stenciling, yes, I would say vertical. If you are shading, you're gonna come in a little bit more sideways. And I'll show you this in a little bit when we get to that part. Any other questions before we go on? Okay. All right, so again, if you wanna do fine lines, you can get really fine lines. I get real close and I'm only pulling back a little bit, right? But if I'm gonna cover like a whole cookie, I would pull back and I would open my trigger a little more so I can get that full coverage. So this is all in the feel of the trigger, and this is stuff that you'll get good at once you start making cookies. Should we do it on a cookie?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing I want to show you is, let's say we are going to cover this whole cookie with an airbrush color. So what I'm gonna do, and you'll notice like in a lot of my videos and when I work, I always keep a paper towel right nearby. Every time I go to use my airbrush gun, I just give it a little spray on the paper towel just to make sure that everything's still working properly, and that especially if you walked away for half an hour and I don't know, something flew into the airbrush gun and got clogged, but just always give just a little spray first. Again, my machine's still on high. Now for this one, because I'm going to cover the whole thing in color, I'm gonna stay a little bit further away. I'm actually gonna start kind of off the cookie and work my way on just a little bit. Now I'm pulling back at one pace and I'm moving at the same pace. It's important to do this in a couple light layers and not all at once. And I'll show you the difference in a second cookie here. So because I did a light layer, this is like already dry, okay? But I want it to really have full coverage, so I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do another layer. Okay. You can take a look at it, you can see if there's any spots. This middle I might need a little bit more. So you could do 2 or 3 layers, not a problem. If you wanna grab these edges and shade them, what you're gonna do is you're gonna come in a little bit closer, and you'll get better at learning the aim from your gun to the corner of the cookie. For shading, it's also helpful to use a turntable. So now you can see I'm a little bit closer, and I'm being real careful as I pull back the gun, and I'm just catching just that edge. And I'm also making sure make sure there's no white showing, since this cookie started out white. So this is a little bit tacky right now, but this will dry quickly because I didn't use too much color. A couple of things you'll notice is that when I was doing the shading, I even stopped pulling back on the trigger in between moving around. So don't like just open up your trigger and then do everything. Like strategically pull back your trigger. And I know that maybe sounds like common sense, but it may not, for some people it may not feel natural. They feel like if it's in my hand, it's on, you know, and the trigger's open. So now you might ask also, why the heck would I do this? Why wouldn't I just flood this blue? All right, let me give you a few instances. I tend to like working this way because I feel if I can, not everything obviously is gonna be able to use this kind of application, but if I have a whole bunch of cookies that are all different colors, and I know that that base coat all needs to be different colors, it's a lot easier for me to do this because I feel confident with the airbrush machine than to mix like 8 different colors, fill my bags, flood them up. Like the time save on that is huge to me. And I flood them all white and then I use my airbrush. Or if you want a fully gold background, a pearl background, this is a great way to do that. Let's say this is the only cookie I need in this color. I don't really feel like mixing that one color up and bagging it again. So this is something you could think about, like how can you get more efficient by using your airbrush gun for what it's good at. Questions?
Can you freeze cookies that are airbrushed, or will they smudge when you defrost?
You can freeze them. What you're going to want to do is whatever like container they're in, once you take them out of the freezer, do not take them out of that container. So what will happen is if you take the whole, like let's say you have them in a plastic, what do you call those?
Tupperware.
Like, Tupperware, thank you. And you have them, you know, in the Tupperware, either in bags or maybe stacked with parchment paper or something. Take the whole thing out and leave everything in the container. So any of the moisture that evaporates off when it's defrosting will come to the outside of the container, not the outside of the cookie. So, but I encourage you, I did this experiment years ago and I forgot until you just asked me that, but try this at home. Take an airbrush cookie out of the freezer. I mean, yeah, like this. Put this in the freezer, freeze it. Take it out, leave it on the counter, and then do the same thing with the cookie in a bag or in your Ziploc, or in your Tupperware. What you're gonna notice is the one that's not in the container, you'll see the moisture will build up on the top as it defrosts, and it'll start to look wet. Now, once it dries, it will dry back down, but the finish of the airbrush will not look exactly the same. It don't look bad from my experience, it's not awful, but it doesn't look as pristine as if you had left it in the container. So that's something you could try at home. You could have a little science experiment of your own.
A little follow-up question that's kind of the same. Someone else asked, is there a chance of bleeding after I bag the cookies? So I think maybe not if you do what you just said.
So the key really with that also, and I'm going to show you what not to do right now, what would lead to bleeding is if you put too much color on. So what I'm going to show you not to do is, this is how most people, or maybe beginners, would think, okay, I want to get this cookie to be bright blue and I just need to get as much color as possible. So I'm going to do this. All right, so it was quick and it's dark blue, but look at the difference because the color pooled up, then the air pushed the wet color around. So you get this really splotchy look, and this will kind of dry looking like this if it dries at all. This is gonna take a really long time to dry. So if you're using a ton of airbrush color and it's taking a really long time for your cookies to dry, that's why. So again, less is more. This is like the slightest bit tacky right now. I could definitely pipe on this. I could stencil on this at this point. This probably still will be wet by the time we're done with this live, okay? So less is more, okay? And do light layers.
Question about how long airbrush color should dry before you can package it.
So it definitely needs to be like fully dry to the touch. So that might just be a few hours. You know, it's not gonna take forever, depending on your workflow. You know, if you're doing piped designs on top of that, like those need also time to dry. So this might be like you do all the detail and you pack them the next morning kind of a thing. But as long as it's dry to touch, you should be good to go.
You can also dust with cornstarch too.
Yes,
that can absorb
do
that.
Yes, they take a light brush, like a fluffy makeup type brush, and dust it with cornstarch. So let's talk about stenciling. Any other questions before I move on?
Oh, well, someone just asked, can you please do a demo with a stencil?
Woohoo!
We paid them to do that segment for us.
Absolutely. You bet your bottom dollar. Because that's like, I feel like I'm like being Ted Lasso right there.
One more before we start that just
Sure
followed.
will.
Can you clean
Yes.
the color off that mat, and how? The counter cover.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't have any clean materials with me right now, but I mean, I have a water bottle. I could just squirt some water on it and it would clean up. But you can clean this in the sink. It dries fast. But that's why the counter cover is great. because it protects your counter. You don't have to, and it's easy to clean.
It'll wipe up very
Yeah.
quickly
Absolutely.
and not stain.
Debbie wants to know if we can mix colors in the well, which yes, we absolutely can. Maybe we could show that after once you're.
You can, yeah. So if you only need a little bit of a specific color and you want to mix it, so let's say, for example, you might want to make a blue sheen, like a blue pearl, and you would add your pearl color and then like a drop of blue in here. One thing you can do is you would turn your machine on, and then if you cover the front, it's going to push the air back into the, see it bubble? It's going to push it back into the well, and that will help like mix the color for you. Sarah showed us this last week too as a good way to kick out if you have a clog, to push it back out and then dump it. Don't spray it right back through. So, but if you have questions about cleaning the gun, oh look, I got all blue already, and troubleshooting, definitely watch Sarah's live from last week, because she did a great job explaining how to clean the gun, best practices on that, and also the most common questions we have that people need help with troubleshooting.
We have just one more question that I think, unfortunately, we won't have an answer for, or a good one anyways. Michelle says, when people eat cookies that I've airbrushed, the dye comes off on their hands and mouths. What am I doing wrong?
Nothing.
You're not doing anything wrong.
That's just
That's the nature of the game.
Same way, if you flood this cookie with a bright blue and they eat it, they're gonna have a blue tongue. It's just make white cookies. I know, and it's funny. I remember when I used to make a lot of cookies, especially to give as gifts. If people wanted something that was like black or a really dark color, I definitely, and I know Sarah, you probably do this.
Always try talking them out of it.
I try to talk them out of it, or I would at least warn them, especially if this is for a special event like a wedding, and you have a black and white theme, and you want black cookies with white, the date put in white. Think about the pictures. Think about everybody's mouth when they eat that cookie. If they eat them at home, if they eat them at the wedding, this may go wrong. So I would encourage you to do white base with black writing. Are we still on, Emily?
Yes, sorry,
Okay.
I got a
Okay.
phone call, which is not supposed to happen.
All right. So
I think we are.
one of the things, if you're going to stencil, that is great to have, is a stencil genie. Stencil genie comes in 2 pieces. So, and it, let me show you, start. It comes with these 2 pieces. First off, if you have a taller cookie, like this one is not a 1/4 inch. What do you think this one is? Maybe a 5/8,
5/16?
5/16. I always say the wrong thing. You might want to buy the XTC piece of the stencil genie. Basically what it does is it gives your bottom piece. So this is 2 pieces. It has magnets on the corner. You put your stencil right there. You pop this on, and you want this to go here. So the stencil needs to be touching the cookie, okay? You do not want it up here. So if I had a really short cookie, I wouldn't want to use, all right, so this is a 1/4 inch cookie, and I have the XTC. Do you see that? This is what we don't want, because that all the airbrush color is gonna get underneath. So if you roll out your cookies thicker, buy yourself a thicker piece to the stencil genie. So now this is nice and tight. If I don't have this and I only have the regular genie, but I have a taller cookie, it's not the end of the world. Just be aware that that bottom piece is not touching it. As long as we're balanced well on this, it's not a problem. But you might want to, next time you're on the website, buy one of the thicker pieces. Another thing I want to mention is, do yourself a favor, and if you're going to be stenciling, get your flood icing as flat as possible. If you have hills and valleys in your flood icing, that's going to show in your stenciling, because those valleys, the airbrush color is going to get underneath and cause some underspray. So work on your piping and your flooding. And I also recommend that, if you know you're going to be, say, stenciling with an airbrush on your cookies, I like to pipe, like this one's piped all the way to the edge. So if you leave yourself like a little bit of that naked edge, most of these are to the edge, the color is gonna get on that naked edge. There's really no way around it. So if you don't want that look, make sure you pipe and flood right to the edge of the cookie. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Can you just say what that additional piece is called again for the stencil,
It's
Jeannie?
called the XTC, for extra tall cookie. So you'll see the stencil genie comes with the 2 original pieces, and then the XTC is an additional piece. So you would need to buy both, and then you would have the different sizes for whatever height cookie you're using. All right, so now I've got my cookie. This is nice and flat. I've got my stencil on here. So for stenciling, you do want to try to aim as down as you can, right? But I'm going to use the same motion as I used on this cookie, where I start on one end and I evenly and not slowly, but evenly go across the cookie, because this is a large stencil with a lot of opening and it covers the entire cookie. If I have a stencil that only has like one little design open in the middle, I don't need to do that whole process. But because this covers the entire cookie, I'm going to use the same kind of motions as I did on that one. So once again, I'm going to just start on my paper towel. I'm about, how far is that? About 6 inches away-ish? 5 inches?
Yeah.
And I'm going to start on one side. Now I'm pulling back real slow. And actually I raised myself up a little bit, so you might want to play with that. Now I'm going to do a second layer. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Just even those little like 5-10 seconds, we'll let this set up a little bit. Now one thing I do want to show you, if your icing tends to like get a little lower on the ends, what you can do is you can take a thingamajiggy, press down on the side if you really want to make sure that edge is crisp, and get your edges. So I didn't do that on the first time, but we'll do it now. So you can also do this if you see some valleys in your flood icing. You can hold the stencil down in that specific spot, so that way you don't get the underspray. All right, now I'm going to do this one more time. Again, nice and light, not too fast, not too much. Take a look and make sure it all looks pretty even. And then you want to lift it straight up or tilt it, like I usually hold down one side and tilt it up. Now I have my stenciled cookie. Pretty, right?
So pretty.
This is a fun design too, because you could always like pipe something different in the circles or copy some of this, or it's just a great background. What you don't want to do, yes, question.
Sorry. Well, Marcia asked, do you recommend airbrushing one way on the first layer and then the opposite direction on the second layer? Does it matter? Is there a benefit?
It matters. I tend to go back to the beginning because it's just like 2 seconds drier than if I went back and forth like continuous. So again, you don't want to layer too much color like when it's wet. Let me show you what not to do, the same way I did on this one. So I'm gonna put this back down here. What I want you to notice is that when I did this before, the stencil still kind of stayed dry looking. It didn't look like wet or soggy or saturated. You couldn't see any color build up. I'm gonna do this like heavier than I would want to, and you'll see the difference. So if I do this, I'm too close, too much color. All right, so see how wet that stencil looks? That's a good visual clue to say, or cue that, oh gosh, I used too much color. So when I pull this off, you're gonna see that there's a lot, I mean, it still doesn't look awful, but there's definitely a lot more underspray, and this is really wet, and this is gonna take longer to dry. So try to not get that wet look on the stencil. Dry, I know that doesn't make sense because we're spraying a liquid on it, but it does dry that quickly because it's so fine.
I think we touched on this briefly before, but someone asked, sometimes my airbrush will splatter on the cookie. Is that clogging, or am I maybe holding the gun wrong?
So if your gun is all the way on low and you only pull back a little bit, it's not gonna have enough air pressure to push out. If you have a clog, it's gonna give you the same effect because the clog is going to stop some of the air pressure from going through. So again, watch last week's video and Sarah shows you how to, different ways to rid yourself of a clog without taking your whole gun apart.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So another thing I want to show you is that we do sell Nata cookies, which are great for practicing. And this is something we do at trade shows. We use Nata cookies and we buy these lovely little coasters that are a great way to practice because you're at the right height and you are, it gives you more of a feel of the cookie without having to bake the cookie, right? Because we don't want to do that every time. So grab yourself a Nata cookie. They're also great for just practicing your piping, practicing your flooding, practicing making circles, maybe playing with some design ideas, you know, without having to bake an entire cookie. So same thing. Now I will warn you that the paper absorbs the color a lot quicker and faster than the surface of royal icing. So that that part of the practice will not exactly be the same, but this is still a great way to practice and help you build confidence. So again, you know, aiming down, nice and even. So if I get too close, what happens is then the color is spraying really hard. So that's why it's important to stay back a little bit. But you also don't want to be all the way back here because then a lot of the color is going to end up over here, over here, over here. So find the place where it feels like you're getting enough color on the stencil and on the cookie without getting it everywhere else. So, and this comes again with practice, with time. You'll notice like there's some airbrush color out here, but not a ton. If you find you have airbrush color everywhere, again, that's probably you're just spraying either too much at once or sometimes it's unavoidable because you just airbrushed 100 blue cookies. So that is also, that could be part of the process.
How many times would you say you could use that stencil over and over again?
So I probably would only, if I'm doing it right and it's staying, you know, dry, I would probably use it maybe 2-3 times. If you, I'll do this again and I'll just show you something. So this one's not washed. Actually, I'll do it on a real cookie. So this is not washed. What can happen when you keep using the same stencil is every time you spray it, you're kind of rehydrating all the color that's on there, and you might end up with like a little buildup right around the edges of the stencil. So I can go this way, I can go this way. It doesn't matter what end you start at. I just recommend moving in one direction to keep it nice and even. You'll also notice, I stop pulling this trigger when I'm not actually using it. You can check for spots, like I didn't get this little corner as well as I wanted to. So just give it a look. There's nothing that says you have to pull this off like within 5 seconds. Okay, oh good, so here's what I wanna show you. All right, so see right here, these little like kind of wet edges, that's from the stencil already having color on it. So if I had used this fresh, it wouldn't have that. Is this the end of the world? No. Is anybody else really gonna notice this? No. But if you see that and you think it's underspray, it's not exactly underspray. It's from the stencil not being cleaned. So it's really quick to just rinse a stencil real fast. Even if you just take the stencil and blot it between a couple pieces of paper towel, that also makes a difference.
Somebody asked, how do you airbrush with more than one color with a single stencil, which we did a lot in both your lives last week.
Yeah,
we touched on
Easter.
That. Yes, so those are all up in our profile.
Yes, and if that's on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram.
If you ask us on Facebook, we could also link it to you on Instagram. We won't be able to see the comments afterwards, but
yes.
If you go back and watch the Easter ones I did, I showed using different colors and how to use different colors on the same stencil, some layering.
Yes. Now, do you pat your stencils dry in between, like, as you're going? I mean, when I rinse mine, I normally just put it on a paper towel and dab it so that I can keep moving.
If I'm near a sink, ideally, you know, I would rinse it real fast and then pat it dry. Yep. It literally takes like 10 seconds.
Exactly.
If you don't have a sink and you're in a, you know, just an extra bedroom, that's your cookie studio, you might have a little basin of water that you quickly, you know, dab it in, or you might just have like a damp paper towel that you put it in between. So you can figure out like a system that kind of works for you, like a workaround. But it is quick just to rinse it out. Oh, so I do want to show the magic stencil too. What other questions in the meantime? Anything else?
No other questions from me.
Okay. So I'll show you the magic stencil. So the reason we designed the magic stencil was to help with things like underspray on stencils, like a wide stripe that is flimsy. I hate using that word because it's a very sturdy stencil, but it has a lot cut out of it. As you know, the design lends itself to movement of the stencil because there's a lot missing because of the design. So that means you could get some air underneath it. So stripes are something that people can hate, but they love the look of it. And again, it's a lot easier to, once you get the hang of it, it's a lot easier to airbrush stripes than to pipe them. It's a totally different look. It gives you a really crisp line. So let me show you, same things apply. You want to make sure that your stencil is nice and tight to here. Now, if I wasn't using the magic screen, what I would probably do if I didn't have one, or before, I used to hold down the stripe with my little thingamajiggy. But with the magic screen, you don't have to do that. So you have the base of your stencil genie, then your stencil, then the magic screen. Make sure all 4 magnets are exposed. Oops. And then that. Okay, so now you have this like 1 unit. You know what though, I forgot. I'm gonna switch out to the bigger base. I could do it either way, but let's do it with the bigger base. So again, I'm switching out to because this is a taller cookie, the extra tall cookie attachment for the stencil genie. Stencil magic screen goes in, and then this piece goes on top, and now this goes over my cookie. So what the magic screen does is it's stainless steel, so it is food safe as opposed to silk screens. But it is a very fine mesh. It allows the color to go through. You are going to use a little bit more color than normal, so just know that in advance because it does have to penetrate the screen. You want to take a look, make sure your stripes are lined up where you want them. But this takes the worry out of the stencil flopping around because now we've created like a really solid unit. So I'm still doing this all the same way. And because these are wide stripes, like I can also stop kind of in between the stripes. I don't necessarily do the whole cookie, if that makes sense. So again, this still kind of looks dry. And I think we're good to go. And then you're gonna lift this whole thing off in one piece. But like, look at those perfect stripes.
Gorgeous. Look, the comparison between the magic screen cookie versus
and I
the edges on that.
Without the magic screen, but look at the beauty of that. So again, you will use a little more color than you would without the magic screen. And once you get used to using it, you might even use a little more than you think because you don't quite see the clarity of the color that's on the cookie because you have the screen in between, if that makes sense. So I always end up, like I've gotten used to it and I spray a little bit more than the color looks. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, because you can't see exactly the achieved color through the screen, but I mean, look at that. It's so pretty. So that's the advantage of the stencil screen. So stencil screens are only, I think, $12.99, but they do come when you buy the Royal Max system. It does come with the magic screen now, so that's nice. And these rinse out really quickly.
Wendy, the mesh is a stainless steel mesh. It's not a fabric, right. So it's not going to stretch out or stain.
Forever.
Yeah.
Rinse them out, pat them dry, you're good to go. Anything else? I think that was everything in my notes. I'm happy to answer some more questions. If there's more questions, did I get to the questions that people had before, do we think?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Well, one question is, what is the difference between the magic stencil screen and the genie screen? But I think we just discussed that. It's fabric, the other one. So
the other one's fabric. So technically, this is a food safe product.
Correct.
Any other questions? So I hope that helped. again, this will be on replay. Go back and watch it from the beginning again. Even like take your airbrush machine out and do it along with me. This, you know, like everything else, this takes some practice. Once you get the hang of it, it's really easy, and I think you'll have fun figuring out ways that you can like up your decorating game or do cool things you couldn't do before. Because there's a lot of things you can do with an airbrush that you can't do when you're just piping. Even if it's just to add a little shading to a pumpkin, you know, simple things like that can really make a big difference in like the final design of your cookie presentation. So thank you for joining us. And so next week, so we're gonna do this again. We're gonna keep this going because we're having so much fun doing live. So next week, someone asked about if we could explain what all the different powders are, petal dust, luster dust. So Sarah's gonna come back next Wednesday and she's going to explain all about edible dusts. Right, Sarah?
I'll be here.
All right, she will be here same time, same place. Thanks for watching, and you guys have an awesome day.